y'all probably guess I always witness somehow at the office, and so I was telling him who, just a little bit, and what I said, and I think it's what you do. To me, most of my witness is just showing that the light is important to me. It's just taking the light out of my pocket and setting it on the table and proceeding with my visit with the patient and letting them know that the light's important to me. And letting them know I am going to try to behave all the time, every day, like Jesus Christ. That's what I want them to see. And so often my witness is only, do you know God? Great. But then to act right all the time. And I think that is the thing that's difficult. That's really what our lesson is about here, is how do you witness, how do you correct without crossing the line and being someone you don't want to be. And that's what Daniel's proposition was here, is how does he still be a good witness to God and correct someone's poor behavior? And that's kind of where we got. And I think that's something we have to think of all the time, and we see all the time. I mean, you watch the preachers on TV. Some of them are not very nice people, and I just thought you see them, and you see them trying to correct all our terrible people, and I really thought, which of the TV preachers, the big preachers, mega preachers, would you really call showing the light?
Billy Graham.
That's the only one that's where I got stuck.
Adrian Rogers.
Adrian Rogers, right? Not
John MacArthur.
right.
David Jeremiah.
And not the real popular TV preachers, huh?
Right.
David Youssef.
Yeah.
But
But you can clearly see the light. And what is the light? And I think it's what you have to show. God is love, God is the light. How do I show the light? By showing love. And showing that unconditionally. And that's what you have to show. And that's my job, is to tell people at the office, I don't really care how bad you are, I don't care whatever. I'm going to love you, and I'm going to do that because God tells me to. And I actually tell people a lot of times, why am I a primary care doctor? Because I will say, I mean, y'all heard me, I'm pretty smart. If you had took people the level of what I did in school, not many of them are primary care. Most of them went and became famous cardiologists or whatever. I mean, because I could have really picked any job I want. And I tell people all the time, why am I primary care? Because God made me be. That's where He put me, and that's my job. And therefore, guess what? I got to talk about Him while you're here. And sorry, but you're going to have to listen about Him a little bit. But never, ever have I said one time in there, are you a Christian? No. Well, you're going to hell. Okay? If they say, no, I'm not a Christian, I might say, well, you ought to be. But mainly, I'm just going to continue to act with concern and love. And I will tell them, you know what, if you really want to talk about what it is to be a Christian, give me a call later on, we'll talk about that. But I think that's what Daniel's doing here. So we're going to do that, but John has something he wants to show us first. So.
Well,
and by the way, I'm having the doctor today too, so I'm not ignoring you while I text here. But
I don't want to take very much time, but I just want to kind of straying from the lesson. But of course, all of you know that Israel divided into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom, 10 tribes, was Israel, and the southern kingdom was Judah, was the tribe of Benjamin, and Joseph. But anyhow, in 606 BC, well before that, the Assyrians came in and they overtook the northern tribe of Israel, and they captured all their wealth and all the people that were associated with that. It literally destroyed. So that was the Assyrians. But the Babylonians came in 606. That's before Christ, and they overtook Judah and destroyed all of it, and got all the gold and the goods out of the temple, took all the temple goods, destroyed the nation, and they took these teenage boys, which were virtually slaves, were taken back to Babylon to be slaves. But anyhow, make a long story short, Daniel was one of those slave boys that worked in the palace. But anyhow, I brought this chart. This is by a guy by the name of Clarence Larkin, and he does a lot of charts. Has in the past. I got to be honest with you, he was a Seventh-day Adventist, but I find his work to be very, very truthful and very good. But anyhow, when Daniel had his dream, this is what he dreamed of. He dreamed of a character, a person, and then in the dream it goes ahead and tells about the head of silver, which was Babylon, and then he has the breastplate and the brass and all down. But anyhow, it even goes on in to the 10 tribes of the Roman Empire. As a matter of fact, Mussolini thought that it was his calling to put the Roman Empire back together. He was going to put the Roman Empire back together and overcome Hitler, was what his long term was. But anyhow, all these things is historical. As he had this dream, we know about the Babylonians, and we know about Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, his grandson, and we know about the writing on the wall. We know about the Medes and the Persians, and their philosophy was nothing can be changed. Any law, if it's broken, you have to suffer the consequences. Of course, that brought the lion's den. And then we go into the Grecian Empire, which was under Alexander the Great. He was the only conqueror in the world that conquered all the world and controlled all the world. And then we go into the Roman Empire, and then we go into these the divided Roman Empire, the feet of clay. And so I wanted to show you this chart and tell you these things because I know it's probably not going to be in our lesson, but Daniel was a very, very vital person to the Gentiles. He was the Apostle Paul of the Old Testament. His vision was totally for Gentiles, the Babylonians, the Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and on and on, even into the book of Revelation. So I just wanted to kind of show you this a little bit. This is kind of when he had his dream. This is a little bit. Of course, this is Clarence Larkin, what he drawed. But anyhow, to see that he did have that vision. But he was a very, very, very vital person to foretell the world's history. And there's even things that are in his prophecy that are yet to come, which ties into the book of Revelation, which most scholars would tell you if you're going to really learn Revelation, you need to really learn Daniel. So, okay, well, thank you, Mark, I just wanted to.
Very good.
Very good. Any questions for him? So we are this one, and it's kind of funny because they did skip that dream entirely in the, in our.
Well, that's why I wanted to show that.
In our lesson, this is 4 and 5, and 4 was not that dream, not the Nebuchadnezzar with the statue dream, but 4 was the Nebuchadnezzar dream of a tree, and the tree growing and then being cut down, but the stump left and all that. And Daniel went and told him what that was. And again, I think we got to look back to that. How in the world do you tell a leader who asked you to come in and say, okay, I've had this dream, tell me what it is? Well, oh great mighty one, it is that you're fixing to go crazy and live out with the ops for. Yeah, so how do you do that? And obviously Daniel was pretty good because we see that one, and then the one we're going to do where he retained his head, despite telling these kings terrible news. And I think that's something we have to be very careful with as Christians dealing with non-Christians. It's very easy to quit being a Christian so we can accuse someone else. Why? What Jesus tells us, Jesus says, do not judge, okay?
But what about what Daniel says to Belshazzar? He prophesied his doom, and he says that even this night,
Yeah,
this very night.
yeah.
So Paul says, I'm not guilty of the blood of all men because I've not failed privately and openly to proclaim to you the whole counsel of God. And so people cannot get saved if they don't understand how they violated God's law. And so I think we need to we win opportunities for the gospel through fight. But when people ask us, we need to deliver the whole message.
You've got to be able to deliver the message correctly. And that's what I think that's the key, what Daniel was able to do, what we got to do. You've got to be able to deliver it as Jesus Christ would. And that, to me, is the key. If you looked at what Jesus Christ, he could cut you to the nubbin and still be the God that is love. Yeah, go forth and sin no more, he tells the lady. All in great love, except she knew everything he said. She knew. He knows everything I've done. He's made it clear. How in the world can he tell me that? How can he? And that's the key I think you've got to learn is, and that's what this is. It is tell it like it is. And I would put in there, as Jesus would almost, you've got to make sure, because what happens if Daniel had came and was not, when he made these interpretations, his witness had been bad from the start. He was not a nice person, and he was not nice when he made these interpretations. What would have happened? His head probably been rolling around there, wouldn't it? I mean, and that's what I say is, and that's what this is to me is, and I think it's when we're witnessing, it's you've got to tell the whole truth. And so, again, like I was talking about the young lady and the difference in Muslim and Christian, I have to tell the whole truth. On the other hand, I also have to be careful because her point is valid. And I can very easily tear my witness down by just saying, well, I don't care if your dad's a good guy.
The most power in the world is money, of course. The people that have money in it and people of influence, they're impressed by people of knowledge. Like he knows something, okay? And they're impressed by those type of people. And this is what was bringing all the different people in the book of Daniel to Daniel. He knew something.
Yeah.
He prophesied, and we've seen his prophecies come one by one, and even still yet are going to happen. He knew something, and they didn't need any more money, but they wanted to know things, and he knew something.
Here, I'm going to read the first part, Daniel 5:1-4. Kind of interesting too. You mentioned this very night. So this is a great feast. The night that Babylon fell. And that's what's interesting. I mean, did he know it was falling before he had that feast? Is that why he had the feast? I mean,
no, he had no idea.
I know, because
I figure he was just clueless. He was in his own world, and he was partying, and he didn't really care.
Think how in the world could an army been waiting outside? He didn't know.
Well, they snuck in through the Watergate. I mean, through the
Have you ever read
aqueducts.
any of the old Civil War things, where they didn't really have scouts? Well, it's like, they came in, and then they went around the trees, and they were gone. And so you would think, gosh, surely he would know. And today we would know. But anyway, so King Belshazzar held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine in their presence. Under the influence of the wine, Belshazzar gave orders to bring in the gold and silver vessels that his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, wives, and concubines could drink from them. So they brought in the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, wives, and concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised their gods made of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. What do you think of that?
And the description of the party is a way more. I mean, there's a lot more. I read a book about this one time, and they had beasts and animals. They had like peacocks would have trays of delightful, the very best food of that day. But they just be walking around the room, and people just, and there was people, eunuchs and people, you know, and they was, you know, I hate to say this, mixed crowd, but there's a lot of sexual things that went on too. It was a really, really, really bad party.
What was offensive to God here is that they used the holy vessels,
Yes.
and it says he did this under the influence of alcohol, and so God is taking offense.
Yeah, and that's what I said. Very simple story of where sins can lead us, and that's what happened. I mean, a few drinks, whatever, and wine. But he says, "Hey, let's go get those things." And the other part of it, we're going to read, but it indicates that he had not forgotten who God was, doesn't it?
But Daniel clearly indicates he should have known, based upon his father's and Nebuchadnezzar's response to God.
Yeah.
When we read what he wrote about this guy.
And you would think if he wasn't wanting to mock God, wouldn't have been that big. I mean, he wouldn't have gone and got those. I mean, you think clearly, to me, he clearly wanted to mock God and say, let me show you I'm bigger than God. Would that be what it is?
I think that's part of it. I think he wanted to show, he's the big guy, he's the king, and I'll just take these vessels from the temple and I'll show you who's in charge.
Yeah. Well, that's simple. I'm gonna move over here.
Don't run off yet.
Oh. I'm gonna move on.
I told you.
But how is this different from what we do today? Don't we take the things that God has provided us and use them in ways that are totally wrong or certainly not advancing His kingdom? And he took things out of God's temple that God had provided for these people and used them for, what he used them for just makes me
I
tremble.
think that it shows exactly what Clay was talking about this morning. I mean, and that I thought again, there's my dang Sunday school lesson right there. Different preacher, different book, same results. But it is. I mean, and you think about it, and that's the same way you think about Clay's lesson. Did you take that cookie? Nope. Well, that cookie's gone. No one's in the house. Of course, you know how, did y'all ever have anything break at your house that no one broke?
Oh, no.
No. But we know the answers. We know that, as Clay said, we know the answers. We know we're caught. We know we're doing it directly in the face of God. And yet we want to ignore that there may be consequences to that.
In Daniel chapter 5 and verse 4, it says he drank wine and praised the gods, and that's little g, of gold, of silver, and brass, of iron, wood, and stone. And as you stated, our gods today, they're made of iron, gold. I mean, people are worshiping folks right now. They're worshiping their car, their boats. Why? Because they're putting it before serving the real God. Amen?
Yeah. You also skipped ahead on me too.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
But the next part is, and it's the same thing, but it is God confronts. Be warned, God confronts. And that's what I think we want to forget, that God is going to confront us. Occasionally, some of it may be at the judgment day or whatever, but I'm pretty sure I've seen the handwriting on the wall before. I've said before, and people took offense to it. I think God confronted me by striking my house with lightning and said, I got some changes you need to make. And by the way, you're going to make them. Okay?
My hand on the wall was before I was saved. The conviction man, I know about, I have preached on how the conviction of God drawing me, and I was beginning to see that I didn't have a whole lot of time left because God, there's a time God quits dealing with people, and I really felt my heart at the age of 23. I was in that category of seeing your doom.
I'll say though, this is 5 and 6, and this is the fear we should feel, whatever. At that moment, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and began writing on the plaster of the king's palace wall next to the lampstand. As the king watched the hand that was writing, his face turned pale, and his thoughts so terrified him that his hip joints shook and his knees knocked together. I'm not sure I ever have had my hip joints shake. Anyone had their hip joints shake?
I think that's what they call sore afraid.
That has got to be scared. I mean, you think? And why is he scared?
Game's over. Well, he's convicted. I think he knows.
Well, he knew when he took those things
Yeah.
from the temple. He knew he shouldn't do that.
That's why I think.
You know, his dad had told him about God.
Right.
Yeah.
But this like brought it home.
Yeah.
This is what I wrote to me, the way I interpreted it, same thing, and that's what you're saying. I just said that we have sins that if God showed up, would we react like that? So do we have sins that if God showed up, we would be so scared of what he was fixing to do that our hip joints would shake? And I would go to say, certainly we do. And certainly the world does, but I think probably individually each one of us could think of something that we probably do that if God suddenly showed up writing something on the wall, we would say, oh my goodness.
Is it possible, you're a medical doctor, is it possible to be scared to death?
Yep.
I've heard that
Yeah.
your heart beats like, it gets to a point where it beats so fast it quits. Is that true? And I'm sure that when people have been in some sort of wreck or some kind of situation, there wasn't a mark on them, but they died. And I've wondered if that wouldn't be in the situation.
No doubt.
So Paul tells us to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. He's talking to believers because we know that God is the one who works in us to will and to act, meaning that God is committed to the process of perfecting us, and he's not going to let us just continue to live contrary to his will. And so even without seeing a sign, we're being called to have this kind of fear and respect towards our God.
I think that what you're saying, kind of what we think is last week, the lesson I didn't like very much, where God said, I will conform you to the likeness of Jesus Christ. Not if you want to, not as you walk. No, God says, I will conform you to the likeness of Jesus Christ. And
he's committed to that process.
Yeah. I hadn't gone quite to that yet, so if you could withdraw that statement, I would. So,
in the light of this man was leader of the country there, it talks about the fingers of the man's hand came and wrote so everybody could see it. Scared the leader to death. Is there any reason why Christians should not pray that God would do this with our national leaders? That he somehow or other would, whatever it takes, that he would, as it were, write on the wall to make them turn to him. Our nation is sunk. If somebody,
I think they would argue about who did it.
The key point is maybe God's writing on the wall, but Belshazzar couldn't see. He couldn't understand the writing. It was only Daniel, and I think the writing's on the wall today. And we as Christians know what's coming. We know what the truth is. But those people out there, you could take an airplane and ride across the sky. They can't see it because they don't understand. Daniel understood what Belshazzar didn't.
Well,
at least Belshazzar actually, he was scared enough that he asked.
Yes.
And
He had
today's
a-
leaders
Nobody's
they
scared.
don't think they're doing anything
he
wrong.
had
They're
an
doing
idea.
what they're wanting to do.
Belshazzar's response said he had a pretty good idea that what he was doing was not right.
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
you know,
And that's been an amazement to me is why he would, at that point, why would he want to know?
But here's our writing on the wall, Gene, right here. Here's our writing on the wall. The
But
written word.
everywhere I go, if you say something about our nation being under judgment of God, I'm not sure how many people really think we're under God's judgment. And everywhere you look, it's just everywhere. So I don't know.
I ask a question if I can. So we're on the internet. That's why I'm asking. Can y'all talk about where y'all are and what you do?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's my question because you asked about leaders. And y'all are witnessing in the place that would have, at least in our history, the worst possible leader in the world could ever have as far as in the not so distant future. So how has it recovered from that process?
Talking about Germany?
Yeah.
From Hitler?
Yeah.
I think they've overreacted to Hitler to the point where, there's no capital punishment. In fact, my son had to go for 9 months to military service there, and they're not even allowed to raise the right hand. If they have a question, they have to raise their left hand. I mean, that's how they reacted to Hitler. But morally, they've turned totally away from the Reformation theology and doctrine. So you have 2 state churches, the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church, but they're just full of religiously lost people. They think they're saved, but they're not. They're baptized as infants. And so you have a moral decline, which is basically the same as here. Homosexuality is considered the norm, and you are considered intolerant if you say anything against homosexuality, and you can actually lose your job at Volkswagen because it's considered a hate crime if you say something against homosexuality. I know. So I live in your future.
Yeah.
And it's coming quickly up also here. So religious freedoms has been redefined. So you no longer have the right to your religious beliefs as long as you keep them for yourself.
Yeah. And that's what. Go ahead, John.
And you said the writing on the wall, that's left the Bible there. That's it. Because how do we know homosexuality is wrong?
And that.
The writing's on the wall.
And that's what we're going to talk about. The rest of it is how we make sure we interpret that writing and interpret it as God would want us to interpret it. And that's the issue to me. Again, I can interpret the writing, but I can act like a Christian, or I can act like the people that I'm reading their sins to. And that's the issue to me is when I do that, and that's where I say again, I think we obviously always can look to Jesus Christ as our example because that's where we're going. Jesus Christ could cut you to an absolute shred. However, you could never deny that he was only speaking in love. I can't do that. When I decide to cut someone to a shred, when I finish, you're not thinking I'm talking in love. And I think most of us would be like that. When we decide that we have to correct someone, it is hard to do like Jesus Christ did and do that in love, but absolutely correct them, okay? And that's the key is how can I absolutely correct someone but still act like Jesus Christ would have done it? And I ain't learned that yet, but that's what this lesson is about.
It requires the fruit of the Spirit.
Do what?
It requires the fruit of the Spirit.
Yes, it does.
Because the other parts are flesh.
Absolutely. So this is be humble, all need to know, and it's 16 and 17. And so this is us after one of his wives, one of Belshazzar's wives or his wife, whatever, told him, hey, Daniel can tell you what's going on. He's man. And so this is This is Belshazzar talking to Daniel. However, I have heard about you that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Therefore, if you can read this inscription and give me its interpretation, you will be clothed in purple, have a gold chain around your neck, and have the third highest position in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered the king, you may keep your gifts and give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription for the king and make the interpretation known to him. What I said on this and to talk about is note Daniel's humility in using God's gifts. Note Daniel's humility in using the gifts God gave him. Do we have examples of this in our lives or the other way around? Because I wouldn't have done it that way. I would have said, yeah, I can read your thing, and you know what? You can give me those gifts, but guess what? You're not going to be king tonight, so why in the heck would I want your gifts? Yeah.
We can be third in line in charge of what?
Yeah. Yeah. So
That's kind of like being director of Sunday school. Sorry.
Well, there's only one Sunday school class in the whole department.
Church. The world is, Daniel he could have said, "Oh, king, that don't mean anything. You're going to be all right," But he took a chance, and the king could have said to him, "Okay, I'm going to die tonight, but you're going before me, guy." There's a lot of ifs there, But he told the truth, and there's few things that hurt worse than the truth, but I can't remember what they are.
And that's one thing we were talking about before. A lot of prophets did say things the way they were supposed to say them, and they did lose their heads.
Yeah.
In fact, Jesus says no prophet can die outside of Jerusalem, and you who kill the prophets. And a lot of times, if you do stand up for God and say what you should say, even if you say it in love, you're going to still be hated. Jesus said, they hated me, they're going to hate you too.
That's absolutely true.
Well, I think we're close to that now.
It is that way.
I'm not sure how long
already.
it took overseas for that to occur. And we're almost there.
And I think we've changed on our internet stuff, but I think if anyone that remembers kind of the attack we had on our class that day, that we probably offended someone today. If anyone's out there looking, probably have. And I have not heard anything that's not said in love. I haven't heard anything, but we probably offended someone. And
We've gotten bolder.
I will say it will not surprise me still someday if something doesn't happen based on the fact that this is broadcast worldwide, where we have to step up and act like God wants us to act. It would not surprise me one bit. And
I'm going to scoot back here.
Yeah.
Everybody's sitting back.
Get out of the way, John.
The whole seeker-friendly movement and the whole emerging church movement have come out of the fear of man, wanting to please men more than God. And emerging churches basically took the seeker-friendly movement one step further to mean that you're not allowed to say that Jesus is the only way.
Yeah.
And that's really emerging church. Emerging church is just simply saying because that's offensive. If you say to tell somebody that what they believe is not true and that Jesus is the only way, then you're offending them. And that is the chief moral good now, not to be offensive. And that's political correctness lived out in Christian life. And that's something we're going to have to face.
So to have a church like that, we're going to have to go underground.
Absolutely.
Something that has captured my attention along the same lines here recently in the news, and we're finally taking some military action, against the ISIS or Islamic Republic Army in Iraq, because they are attacking these two separate groups of people that are isolated there. One are they keep saying that they're Christians that have lived there for centuries, right? And there's this other group the Zetes, who are kind of an offshoot of a little bit of everything. Not really sure what they are, but no action was taken against these invaders until they were starting to attack these, what do you call it? The Zetes. Not so much the Christians. We weren't taking any action at all against them for that, but when they started attacking this other group of folks, we took action. And it goes along that line right there. Have you noticed that? Have you seen that?
The dictionary says that group is an offshoot of Islam.
Well, and no doubt. I mean, it says they're kind of a hodgepodge, but it's like, but they were killing Christians. Oh, that's a bad thing. I'm sorry to hear all about that. But they're killing.
Doesn't even make the news.
Huh?
Persecution of Christians doesn't even make the news.
I know.
It's not a news item.
I have a question. Is it all right for us to pray for the annihilation of ISIS? Because that's what I'm doing now.
Whenever we pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, we're praying for judgment, because that's not going to happen until Christ returns. And so, but that's when you start to see God and His glory as being more important than man and His salvation. And God is glorified through the salvation of man. But it's important for us to remember that the first commandment is to love your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like you love your neighbor as yourself. And so we can't love man more than God. We tend to be more gracious than God Himself.
Seldom we get excited about the present affecting the future until it affects us as individuals. This week we ran across an article on the internet where the EPA came out and confiscated a $60,000 Rover type truck, kind of like those old, I don't see them around here anymore. What's the old trucks around?
It's a Toyota Land Rover or a Hummer.
Yeah, because it didn't meet EPA standards. And now they won't even tell them where their car is at. So you think, should be driving,
Well,
I
you
guess,
wonder
because
why.
like it.
You wonder why all the cities now, large and small, are getting these armored vehicles.
Because they're militarizing the policemen.
But can the government just come in and take your vehicle and
Keep
go?
them out.
They don't like what it does.
It's scary. Last part is be honest, judgment comes. And this is 23 through 28.
This is the part I would like to think that when Daniel looked at the writing, I would kind of hope he would go, yikes. That's what I wanted to say.
I reckon he said a few times, "Are you sure you want me to interpret?" Okay, I can interpret it, but are you sure you want me to hear this?
Go back to the verses to skip between those two. It gives a recount of Nebuchadnezzar ends up living like an ox and all these sorts of things. Basically, it says, "Man, you didn't learn anything from your grandpa."
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's the first part.
Well, he didn't even know who Daniel was. The queen had to come in and
That's
remind
true.
him, oh, you got this guy over here that can probably tell you what this says.
I want to
but
bring
he
that
didn't-
up before I read
He
this. So
didn't
what,
go to him. Daniel has been there to
Yeah.
3 kings now, or 3 kings, and he's about to be going after this lesson next week. He's into to another king, and always he ends up being promoted up to a high position because he's given this interpretation, whether it be favorable or not. He still impressed them with his knowledge and his God, and Nebuchadnezzar would always come back, okay, now we're going to praise Daniel's God for a while. But then he forgets, and then
so why,
and this
why did Daniel go down? Why did he not become the great leader?
We just hope that there's somebody today that's getting to our people that make decisions. I mean, we got Joseph. He was outcast. They said, "Look, and he was promoted to high places. Daniel was promoted. Paul was in the household of Caesar Nero, which was probably the worst Caesar that ever lived. I mean, he was crazy. He persecuted Christians, but Paul worked in his house to the extent that Paul said in his writing, he said, all the saints of Caesar's household. He was getting people saved in Caesar's household, and Caesar was standing by. He may have not seen it, but Paul was there. and he didn't evidently have any influence on him, but I just hope that there's somebody whispering in the president's ear today, you know. We need people like that God raises up.
I think I wanted to keep Daniel right where he was. I think your question was, why didn't Daniel rise to the top and like be in charge?
Yeah.
Yeah, for one thing, well, he was a Jew. They would let him in. But
Well, under the Medes and Persians, he was high.
yeah,
I mean, he was. It's kind of hard to go higher up than he did, because there was only the 3 satraps, and he was planning on putting him over those other 2 as well. And so, under the king, he was the highest official in the government.
It's kind of like somebody asked Ronald Reagan one time, "Are you the most powerful man in the world?" They said, "No." They said, "Who he is?" He said, "The fellow dancing on a daily schedule." And so Daniel is behind the scene, but
Right.
he's controlling everything.
Yeah. But I think what we have to realize is that in Romans it says that God's name was blasphemed amongst the Gentiles because of God, or because of the Israelites' behavior. They forced God to punish them, and as a result, those pagan countries thought that their gods were greater than the God of Israel. So what God's doing throughout the book of Daniel, and there's one statement that's repeated at least 5 or 6 times throughout the book of Daniel, and that is that until you acknowledge that all the kingdoms of the earth belong to me, and I loan them out to whomever I please choose. And this statement gets repeated throughout, and that is the major message of the book of Daniel. And so God is defending his name throughout the book of Daniel by exalting himself in the eyes of the nations, even though he's punishing Israel for these 70 years of captivity. And so it's important for us to realize that God is gaining glory for himself through Daniel during this time, and through his 3 friends, and exalting his name that has been drawn through mud because Israel has forced God's hand, punished them through Gentile pagan kings and nations. And now those nations think that their gods are greater than the God of Israel. And God's proving to them that is not the case.
You know, if you'd stay in this Sunday school class, stay going back to Germany, you're reaching the whole world, not just one. What you heard, guys? I mean,
My sermon's going online there.
you know, I'm just saying. It has been very good. Very nice to hear.
I'm just thinking the scripture says that God raises up one and puts down another. And I look around at the leaders we have and I think, we are in big trouble. You know, this is what we.
Yeah. And I think it's where we've got to stay strong. You just have to stay strong and know what's right. And here's this part anyway. But you have not glorified the God who holds. This is Daniel talking now to Belteshazzar. But you have not glorified the God who holds your life breath in his hand and who controls the whole course of your life. Therefore he sent the hand, and this writing was inscribed. This is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, mene, tekel parsin.
wow, it's from a Arkansas accent.
You're doing good.
Sounds Arabic to me.
This is the interpretation of the message. Mene means that God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel means that you have been weighed in the balance and found deficient. Paris means that your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Somewhere I read it was the thing said was interpreted numbered, weighed, and divided.
Yes.
And well, that's pretty. Yeah, let me tell you what it means. And I bet Daniel didn't really have to explain much.
No.
When you think of how Belteshazzar responded just to the hand, I bet Daniel didn't really have to interpret much when he just said, "Yeah, here's what it says." I bet it's pretty straightforward.
I bet he could have said, "King, what do you think it says?"
Yeah.
King is probably saying,
I won't be here for a while. You guys, I'll catch you
Daniel
later.
may have been thinking, if I can just delay saying till tonight, then the punishment will happen and I won't have to tell him. So,
Yeah.
what is? I mean, and it's what you said. This was something because the king lost his life that night. I mean, it was like, yeah, time's up, buddy. You've been weighed. You're not sufficient. Your kingdom's being divided tonight. And oh, by the way, you won't be around to see that.
So even if he hadn't sinned, this would have had to have taken place because God wrote 100 years before that, before Jeremiah. God wrote a personal letter to King Cyrus, letting him know that he was the one that was going to send the Israelites back. 70 years are up at this time, and this is why almost his first day in office, Cyrus issues the decree. And so Daniel's probably showing Cyrus this letter that God wrote to him through the prophet of Isaiah in chapter 45. And this letter is God's telling him who he is. So God's writing a personal letter to King Cyrus before he was even born and before the Babylonians were even on the power, much less than the Medo-Persians. And this is such a powerful thing. So even if Belshazzar had not sinned on this evening, his kingdom still would have fallen because it had to happen for prophecy to be fulfilled.
And I think that's the tough thing when we talk about prophecy, when you talk about God's way, whatever. It is going to happen.
It is going to happen.
It is going to happen. What we do, and I've said, and it really hurts. What I do really doesn't matter. It is going to happen, and so I mean, and that's where we don't understand it because, yeah, it's going to happen.
He has an absolute and a permissive will.
Daniel was, he was saying, hey, there's going to be greater prophets than me even come, but this was my prophecy. Jesus was probably the greatest prophet that ever lived, and he was talking about future things from that point on. John on the Isle of Patmos received the revelation. He was prophesying things, maybe some that'll happen in our life, probably have, and some things that are yet to come. There's things going to keep coming on and on, even after the 1,000-year millennial reign. There's things that are going to happen. So all these prophecies are just things that, hey, this is going to happen.
We got 5 minutes, so we'll talk. Ask this here. Here's my comment. Note how Daniel warned of God's judgment. He was able to do this because he lived a godly life. Remember, you build your witness daily. Only is it good will you be able to read the handwriting on the wall. Is that correct? I'm just asking.
Well, the old adage, no news is good news. And what didn't happen to the king that night, I think the thing that really gets me is the hand. Just a hand there, and him seeing it, he's got to know.
What I say, I think there are times when we're in that situation where we know how to interpret what that hand on the wall said to someone. But if you don't have the proper witness, what's remarkable? If you look at this, many, tickle, whatever, that was language they should have been able to read. And no one in the whole kingdom could interpret that, except for Daniel. Why is that? Well, because God allowed Daniel to interpret it. That's why. Well, when we go to interpret something, if I do not have a good witness, and I try to tell someone, this says you're a horrible person, and if you don't straighten out, you're going to go to hell or whatever. And yet, I'm that same person.
Well, our lives need to win opportunities for the gospel. In 2 Peter, he says, live such good lives, or 1 Peter, live such good lives amongst the pagans that they see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of his visitation. In chapter 3, it says, be prepared always to give an account of the hope that lies within you when people ask. So our lives in a hostile environment, and America has unfortunately become a hostile environment towards Christianity, Christians. We do need to be winning opportunities for the gospel by living a separated, holy life. And so when people ask you, why do you not cheat on your taxes, or why do you believe that, or why do you think that that's wrong what I just did, then you can tell them. You have an opportunity to share the gospel.
We're kind of like the guy running for a public office. We better be squeaky clean. We start
So Daniel, you see that in his life too. They looked, he couldn't find him.
Right.
That is right. So, comments? I think we're going off the air